Our first speaker, Mitch Parker, is the Executive Director, Information Security and Compliance at Indiana University Health. Mitch is currently redeveloping the information security program at IU Health, and he regularly works with multiple non-technology stakeholders to improve it. He also speaks regularly at conferences and workshops, including HIMSS, IEEE, and also a group that I'm in with him, the IEEE P1912 Working Group, to create security and privacy standards for consumer wireless devices. So, Mitch, welcome today, and please take it away.
Thank you very, very much, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everybody. So, let's get over to that next slide. I gave an abstract to the presentation here, but I'm going to get right to the purpose. And the purpose is to communicate how organizations can effectively transform themselves to manage network medical devices securely. And realistically, it does take a village. So how can we accomplish this? We have 4 different ways that we can do so. Number 1, we're going to go through what regulations matter and what they really mean. Then the 2 I'm going to bring up are going to be HIPAA and Joint Commission. We're going to next talk about how to manage your supply chain lifecycle to handle these regulations. We're then going to go into how to manage your organization to secure these devices, and finally, how to manage your vendors. So getting to this first, obviously, there are 3 parts of the HIPAA security rule initially that just stick right out. The biggest one being that you have to implement policies and procedures to prevent, detect, contain, and correct security violations. You also have to have your security awareness and training program for all members of the workforce, including your management. High-Tech extended that to your vendors. And we also have to have security incident procedures. Moving on, you have to have a contingency plan. And then this is the one that gets everybody, which is you have to do your technical and non-technical evaluation, or as we call it, a risk assessment, every time you make a major change. And it doesn't matter whether it's on one of your systems or a vendor systems, as we look at it, you have to do that risk assessment, and that's key. So also policies and procedures, we knew about that. But what a lot of people don't know about are the Joint Commission standards. And what Joint Commission has done is they had information management standards, but what they're doing is they're folding them into their emergency management standards. So one of the key items we found over the past few years was the hazard vulnerability analysis. This is a tool I've used quite significantly in the past, and we've just finished revamping here at IU Health. So instead of having a hazard vulnerability analysis just says computer systems, ours has right now about 10 different subcategories of different types of systems, everything from medical devices up to electronic medical records and texting systems. So when we do our HVA, which is more of a qualitative risk assessment, we break down the types of computer systems involved because that's what Joint Commission requires of us. And everyone from the organization participates in our HVA analysis. And Joint Commission also requires that we prepare to fail. That is most important. And you have to have those mitigation activities, preparedness activities, and response and recovery strategies outlined. So these were very explicit in the information management standards. We're also explicit in the information and environment of care standards that I have up here on the screen right now. And again, response and recovery, this is something a lot of people have not focused on. This is something we are focusing on. So again, bringing this back to what does this all really mean? You have to have policies, processes, and procedures to handle your security incident violations. You have to have your periodic risk assessments when you implement or change systems because you have to address potential risks at the onset. But most importantly, you have to design for the worst case scenario. You have to design for system total failure, to be without a system, and to bring it back online safely. Because most people think you bring a system back up, that's it. That's usually not the case. You have to test, you have to validate, you have to verify, and in the case of downtime, you have to get back any data you had on paper back into the system in a usable format. So what's really happened in the industry. And we'll go over 4 key points here. Number one, we see the advantages of a technology, but we don't see the associated costs. This is because you get a lot of salespeople from vendors that are infamous or famous for telling medical staff that IT doesn't need to be involved, so they have the latest and greatest device. And like Rebecca alluded to earlier, you have a lot of medical devices that are not being placed on networks with due care. So you could have the most secure wireless network in the world, but I create another wireless network that doesn't have security. That's not due care. And this leads to an over-reliance on technology to automate processes without the appropriate checks and balances. And the spirit of the HIPAA security rule and the spirit of Joint Commission is about having those checks and balances in place to make sure that you mitigate risk. And what we found in our research over the past few years, there's a lot of commonality between the information security requirements and regulatory requirements. I'm going to list 2 examples of regulatory/accrediting agencies that actually have rules that track very close to security. Those are the American College of Radiology and the College of American Pathologists. And what we've had more success with is an emphasis on developing repeatable processes to address and mitigate risk based on some of the standards set by CAP or American College of Radiology or Joint Commission. And there's more success when having an emphasis on recording information and developing operational and downtime plans when you put devices in, as opposed to not saying IT needs to be involved, because there's multiple players. My organization, we call it the triumvirate. Triumvirate is emergency preparedness, IS, and our regulatory affairs team. And this is what we're trying to avoid. There's a focus now on medical device security without looking at the whole picture, because outside of the work we do in information security, there's day-to-day regulatory compliance operations and documentation that have to happen anyway, that happen whether or not security is involved. And the medical device security we're seeing doesn't involve planning to fail. It involves being defensive, keeping the bad guy out. Inevitably, something's going to fail. That's the nature of technology. You have to be prepared to fail. And when you look at this as a security problem, as you don't plan to fail, you need to look at it as a business issue with a security component. The mantra I have a new job is that cybersecurity is a business problem. This is what we've taken to our executives, what we've taken to our C-suite. Everybody agrees. Information security is not an IS problem. It is a business problem. And again, we bring up the triumvirate. We also have the clinical contacts as well that are also critically important. So bringing us over to supply chain, big item that you have is your contracts need to cover the following 7 different areas. First one being good, secure network design, because you need to understand that data flow of where that data is going. You also need to understand that you need to transmit only the minimum necessary information needed for a business transaction, whether it be patient information or something else. It has to be minimum necessary. And that you're able to take that data flow diagram and the data being transmitted and apply proper security controls. And when you do, you have log files that are retained for the proper amount of time to show that you've done so. And again, we've aligned everything we've done with Indiana state law and federal law, and you have to retain data for a while. And you make sure that you mitigate risk by making sure you apply the proper product and security updates on a regular basis. And another major component that we found has been that a large number of medical devices out there have unsupported operating systems, because people think you can just take a medical device and put it in a corner and have it work for 10 to 15 years. Well, that doesn't work the way it used to anymore. And you need to be able to do so. So, just got a question here about how long the log files need to be retained. I can tell you that is a gigantic case of it depends. And Indiana state law is much different than Pennsylvania in my experience. But again, I would check with an attorney if I were you. And most importantly, vulnerability management is very important, because if there's a security issue that comes out, you need to make absolutely 100% sure that you have it in your contracts that within X number of days you'll have a mitigation plan, and Y number of days you'll have a patch or other fix. That's critically important. So you need to have that at the contract level to make it enforceable. And also, we recommend you train your supply chain team. You need to work with them to make sure that anything that contains patient information, involves connecting to the network, or is a medical device, goes to information security before signature. I had a case with a medical device vendor swearing up and down to me 3 months ago that their device did not handle patient information, did not store it. Found out the device actually took screenshots, and I was able to take screenshots of the device as it was recording something for a fake patient, put them on a micro SD card, and had it in my MacBook Pro within 30 seconds as a JPEG file. They signed a business associate agreement 2 days later. You also have to make sure that the outgoing contracts have very strong security language. And again, time-based vulnerability management clauses. You have to hold people accountable for X, Y number of days. And also emphasize supported hardware, operating system, and operating environment. So to give you a perfect example, Heartbleed was an issue with the OpenSSL libraries where basically if you had 64K worth of data, you could decrypt any encrypted transmissions. A lot of devices out there run Linux and a lot of old versions of OpenSSL. So something like that happens, you have to have teeth, no questions asked. And comes to managing the organization. Again, like we said before, if you just focus on cybersecurity, you're only managing part of the picture. And the reason why is because you're making your work harder. You're making it harder for yourself because you're not including the other team members that can help you. And as we emphasize again, the same requirements for security are often the same for regulatory, including log files, daily maintenance, IT asset management, and risk management. You're doing this whether or not InfoSec is involved. So you might as well be involved and save the work. And approaching it as a business problem, our mantra here. The teams actually using the devices have standard procedures they need to follow already, especially if it involves radiology. And the regulatory agencies add on those additional requirements to reduce risk. And again, I'm going to give two prime examples here: National Patient Safety Goals and the Joint Commission Equipment Management Standards. And we need to break down these security requirements into necessary component goals. We just can't say you have to be secure, because people aren't going to listen to you if you do that. So what we do here is, using these component goals, we develop operational plans with the following in mind. Number one, isolation of devices except for minimum necessary secured communication. And we break down into daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly tasks that need to be done, with a focus on maintenance and security integrated with the existing tasks needed for regulatory requirements. And we structure it so the non-technical staff can follow. The reason why we do that is because they're already doing the work. You might as well just slot into what people are doing instead of giving people a whole new stack of work to do, because if you give them a whole new stack of work to do, they're not going to do it. And again, we talk about contracts like we've done before. And the other thing you have to appreciate is that organizations are finite in resources, and you're competing against limited resources for regulatory compliance, especially in healthcare. So if you can combine those resources from the triumvirate we talked about, you can achieve economies of scale. Instead of having 3 different sets of responses and tasks and 3 teams doing the work, you have 1. And your asset management program needs to be not just IS focused. You have to have those non-IS requirements. An asset management program is very key because everything you do in HIPAA, as we look at it, is based upon knowing where assets are at any given time, because if you don't know where it's at, you're not effectively protecting it. And you have to add in your vendors and have good vendor management, because your vendors, they are your team members. And one emphasis I can talk about with medical devices, the big vendors are shifting from product-based sales to value-based partnerships. Big example I can give is the partnership that was signed very recently between Jefferson Health in Philadelphia and GE. And here's another kicker. No vendor out there wants to be associated with a security issue. That's the worst kind of public relations they can have. So you want to work towards having that mutually beneficial relationship with your vendors. So what does that consist of? How do you have a good relationship? You have to have good communication with the support teams. So usually you'll have a big account manager and a whole team of people the vendors will bring in. So what you want to do is have that two-way street where you talk about product roadmaps, future plans, future technologies. If you have to sign an NDA, so be it. But it's important to know this information. And most importantly, know who to call when you have an issue. And we're not just talking about the support hotline or the 800 number. Know who the product security people are. Know how to report it in a potential vulnerability. We actually had something with a major medical device vendor very recently where I had to track down the product security director to responsibly report in a vulnerability on a medical device that we had found, because we told them it was more important for us to responsibly report it to benefit all customers above anything else. And also, going back to the two-way street, make sure that they call you with security issues. I can tell you at least one major vendor that actually calls people. They do try and reach out. So make sure that contact information is kept current and that everybody knows on both sides who to call. And as part of that, when you have everyone who around you, when you put these systems in, you build to isolate them on the network. You build for minimum necessary information. And you have to do that. This is not a case of where everything could be in the open anymore. Everything you have should be as isolated as possible. But one big way vendors can help you is they do this hundreds of times a year for hundreds of customers. And they can share some of their information and best practices at multiple levels. And what's important is that you share your experiences as well so that other customers can benefit from yours. And that's really key. So you can't just take. You have to give. And realistically, if you're not giving to help each other out, we're never going to improve security. It's just not going to happen. So what have we learned today? We have a lot of regulations we need to follow, and we have a lot in common with the non-IS components of the organization. And we emphasize using that unified plan that includes supply chain, regulatory, emergency preparedness, the vendor partners, and security on one playbook. It increases efficiency and it makes all of our lives easier because we have to work with limited resources. No matter what, we're always going to be doing that. And it really is a business problem. And if you focus on it, you can affect regulatory compliance and you can affect everything for the better as opposed to just focusing on one small area. So with that, here's my contact information. I'll open myself up for any questions or comments.
Yeah, Mitch, thank you for that. You really covered a lot of great information in a very short period of time. We do have someone who wants to know if you have any comments on what Merck could have done given their recent near total meltdown, and I'm quoting what they're writing here. They said that even their phone system was affected. So they're wondering, we have someone wondering what your comments or thoughts are about that.
Well, realistically, first of all, I respect Terry Rice, who's the CISO of Merck, and his program. I think they've done a great job there. We don't have all the information on what happened there, and until we do, I'm not going to make any speculation, but I'm going to say that anytime you have a situation like that, you have to be prepared and have good backup systems in place and have them tested. Merck is a pharmaceutical manufacturer. Had that been a healthcare provider, there would have been a number of alternative methods in place simply because under Joint Commission, you have to have it because they're in a different industry than providing care, but a lot of it still applies. And again, we don't have all the information on Merck, and I'm not going to speculate and say what they could have done better when they haven't even talked about what happened yet.
All right, makes sense. Well, thank you very much for all that information. And maybe at the end, for those of you listening and watching today, if you have any more questions, you can enter them in your Q&A panel. And if we have time at the end, we will definitely get to them. So thank you very much, Mitch. We sure appreciate it.
Thank you, Rebecca.